Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Craig and Dave Unscripted. So today we're going to dive into and look at something which is quite kind of close to Dave and I's heart in terms of understanding how students and how people in general retain knowledge over time. You know, how do we learn? How do we recall information? And we hope this video will be interesting to both teachers and students alike. So we're going to talk today about something called the forgetting curve. And when we get into this, hopefully you'll really start to understand some of the research that's gone into understanding how not only we learn information, but how we can then retain and recall that information over a period of time. So we'll start with a little illustration. Let me just take that tag off the screen and we'll explain it straight away. So the basic notion here of the forgetting curve is that over time, we gradually lose the knowledge that we have been taught if we don't revisit the topic regularly. So you can see here 100% retention on the left, and you know the information, but you come back after several hours, days or months, and all of a sudden you've forgotten it. And of course, that seems bonkers for a student. I mean, there's all this specification content to learn, and you learn the spec and you learn it over time, but your exam is in the summer of the following year. And yes, we do revision, but then you've got to cram all this revision at the end of the summer and you feel like you don't remember the stuff you learned last year. Well, first of all, don't panic. This is just what happens. I think the statistics, now you might be correct me if I'm wrong here, Dave, the statistics say that if you don't revisit knowledge, we lose about 80% of it. Is that correct? 80 or 90% of knowledge is lost if you get taught it once and never again. If you come back months later.
Yeah, I don't know the exact stats, to be perfectly honest with you, Craig, but it is very clear, both from the research and evidentially in the classroom, that students just forget things. And I will be honest, I've been in a situation in my classroom where I've thought, what's even the point of all these lessons? Why don't we have a good time just, using computers, learning programming, and, like I say, let's have a good time for a year and a half. And then in the last half of the final year, let's just cram all the theory so that when you get into that exam hall, you're in that place that's good to go. And you kind of brought me to my senses one day, Craig, and said, yeah, but that's not how you prepare for a marathon, is it? You don't sit on the sofa for months and months on end and then suddenly decide in the last 6 weeks I better do some preparation for this marathon. No, of course, but it is important that we recognize that humans do forget things over time. And it's really frustrating in the classroom. I'll say to my students, so what's the purpose of the program counter? Oh, don't know, sir. Well, that was last lesson. That wasn't even months later. And then if I ask them again months later, what's the purpose of the program counter? They don't know, because we learned that in September and it's now October, November.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of really covered the first one. We've told you essence what the forgetting curve is, and what the research says, that without some way of overcoming this, which obviously we're going to look at next, that humans in general, people have different memories and all the rest of it, but in general you do lose the bulk of what you've learned or been taught over time. That's just natural. So this leads us naturally onto how can we overcome this. And this is why this video, I think, is just as useful for teachers and students. As a teacher, you want your students to retain as much knowledge as possible that you've taught them. You want them to be able to say months later, I can still tell you what I learned in September. And as a student, obviously, you'd like to have that feeling that when you get to the exam, I'm there. I don't have to do serious amounts of cramming and revision. Actually, I've been retaining this knowledge. That's where we want to be. As teachers, we want that. As students, you want that. So how do we get around that? So I'm just going to share that. So there's the original kind of forgetting curve. I'm going to put one more slide up and get Dave to kind of talk through this. Did you want to say anything before I bring up what comes next, Dave? Or should we just dive
it's not memory tricks here. No. This isn't a kind of, show where somebody has got, a great way of memorizing things and they can remember, for the order of all the cards in 4 or 5 decks of cards without making a single mistake. And they're using very particular skills to enable them to do that. They're creating stories in their mind about the cards in order to be able to basically recall the story. That's how that works. We're not talking about that. This isn't, a memory game or a memory trick. This is just simply remembering the theory that you have been taught over a longer period of time.
Yeah, okay. So simple graph then. We've got the information retention on the left and time elapsed on the bottom. You get taught the information, and at the point you get taught it, it's freshest in your mind. And then very quickly, we lose a lot of that information. So the crux of beating the forgetting curve is, unsurprisingly, to revisit the material often and frequently and often. It's the idea of constant review and repetition, which of course can be quite difficult both as a teacher and a student to cram into the limited time you have to study. You have this large body of information to study, and it's like, well, we're going to go through everything, and then we'll do a big revision session. But by that point, you've lost most of that information. You can see here that by this first review point, the knowledge retention goes back up. But then more importantly, having revisited the content, it's staying in your memory for longer. But should we just do it once? No, have another review point later on and another review point later on. And you can see effectively what's happening here, that if from the point you gain the knowledge to the point you're being examined, you have opportunities to revisit that learning multiple times, then each time you revisit it, you're bringing the knowledge back into your short-term memory, you're consolidating that information, you're creating more cognitive links, and you retain the information for longer and better, essentially. I'm not sure whether I'm wording that particularly well, but the graph probably says it, Dave, doesn't it?
No, you are. And this is what Rosenshine says as well. Daily review, weekly, monthly review. It's important to review the knowledge that you've previously been taught. And I think one of the mistakes, if you like, in education at the moment is that we do an awful lot of what's called blocking. So you learn some content, like I say, in September, then you learn some different content in October, some different content in November, December, and so it goes on. And you leave the revisiting or the review, as Craig says here, until the end of the course. And that's a big mistake if you want to maximize your performance in exams. You need to do something different. You need to have a look at this material literally on a daily basis. Now, of course, the problem with that from a teacher's point of view is that we don't have enough time. Okay, we only just have enough time to teach the material that's in the specification. Never mind saying, okay, we're now going to take a lesson out to revisit all the stuff that I taught you, last month, for example. There just isn't enough time in the timetable to enable you to do that sufficiently, which is why interleaving is important, but it's hard to achieve. Interleaving is this principle that it's the opposite of blocking. Instead of learning something September, then October, then November, that you learn something in September, and then October's content also contains some of September's content. When you get to November, then that contains October's content and September's content. And you continue to sort of build an interweaving, that's why it's called interleaving, knowledge over time.
Yeah, so, we've quite consistently highlighted there, I think, what the forgetting curve is and what we need to do to try and overcome it. But the challenge, as Dave has just said, is how do we get that in? And that's something here at Craig and Dave that we think about a lot, because we've said this before in previous videos. When we're not trying to boast or be arrogant, when we're saying we're not just another resource provider, we're still practicing teachers. We want to think about how you learn, how you retain knowledge, what the learning journey is like. And if this is a problem, retaining knowledge over time, but there's no easy way for the teacher to generate more lessons out of nowhere, then how can we aid and help? Now, this is going to move us nicely onto obviously a plug for Smart Revise, but there's a purpose behind this. So you may or may not be aware of Smart Revise. It's our course companion that you can use outside of the lesson when you're on the bus at home, and we'll do a whole series of videos on Smart Revise, and there's already a nice little series up on YouTube anyway. But today specifically, I think we want to talk about the forgetting curve and how the essence of beating that was built in to Smart Revise's first quiz mode from day one. This wasn't a feature that came later, was it, Dave? This was an integral part of making this work. Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, being a publisher, we do sell these materials. I'm not going to lie to you. Of course we do. But that's not our starting point. Our starting point isn't, okay, how can we make something that's going to make money? That's not the starting point. The starting point is, here's a problem that I'm experiencing in my classroom. Why am I experiencing it, and how can I overcome it? So as I suggested earlier, I was experiencing in my classroom a very frustrating situation of students not remembering the basic knowledge. Now, I accept that some of the concepts are quite hard and that they require a lot of study. But the basic fundamental knowledge, what's a variable, what's a constant, what's the memory address register? These are simple questions that you should be able to just, reel off without having to revise them. So understanding that my students were struggling with this, I set about looking for a solution with Craig, and we do a lot of brainstorming together and say, well, what's your experience? This is my experience, right? What do you think would work? And then we try a few things in our classroom and we reflect on it and we decide, well, that bit worked and that bit didn't work. And we have, evolved these things over time. So the quiz mode in Smart Revise was definitely not born out of how can we sell a multiple choice quizzing tool. Those things already exist.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel in that sense. What we're trying to do is look at the problem from a different lens. Our students are forgetting. How can we prevent them from forgetting? Well, the first thing is that they need to be doing this every single day. They need to be revisiting this almost every single day, and certainly in every lesson. So how can we achieve that? Well, we achieve that by starting all our lessons with 5 minutes of Smart Revise at the beginning of every lesson. Now, if you don't want to do it at the beginning of the lesson, do it at the end as a plenary. If you don't want to do it in the lesson at all, set it as homework. If you don't want to set it as homework, then set it as additional learning outside of the classroom that the students can do while they're on the bus or wherever they are. If you only do 5 minutes a day, it will have a massive difference. We're not talking about a 2-hour revision session here.
Yeah, and so what Dave said there is that's great. So, but how have we actually incorporated the forgetting curve in here then, Dave? Because I mean, you're right. Couldn't they just use another one of 101 revision tools that do multiple choice questions? I mean, we can say, yes, use it at 5 minutes every day. Well, I could use this system for 5 minutes a day, and this has 3 quizzes on it. But we've gone further than that as well. I mean, we've actually built the theory of learning and then the idea of how to beat the repeating curve into how the product actually asks you the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good point. Well, firstly, the content itself is written by us, or it's written by other teachers that we know and trust, and some of those are examiners. So this is not a free-for-all. This is not any student can create a quiz, contribute it, and you download it, and you don't know if it is pin sharp on the specification. So that's the first thing. The content exactly matches the specification. If you're studying AQA, then your questions, some of the questions are subtly different to if you're studying OCR. So for example, with OCR, you need to know the memory data register. But with AQA, you need to know the memory buffer register. It's the same thing, but there's a different word. And in Smart Revise, we're very, very careful to make sure that those subtle nuances for every specification are fully covered. We don't go beyond the specification, so you're never learning things that you wouldn't get examined on. That's another common mistake that a lot of tools out there do. They put things in that you're just not going to get examined on. It might be interesting, but what's the point with a revision tool? And we don't go below the bar either. So everything that's in here is exactly what you could get asked theoretically in an exam. Okay. Now, multiple choice questions are not used extensively with OCR papers, but they are with Edexcel, with AQA, and the exam boards are shifting that up all the time. And you can anticipate, even with OCR, having more multiple choice questions in the future. But it's not about it being multiple choice, because some of the things that teachers will say is, oh, well, where's the extended answer questions? Well, Smart Revise supports that as well, but that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to remember the key bits of information. And here's the next mistake that a lot of products make. They give you 50,000 questions. Yeah. And the goal should not be to create as many questions as you can. The goal should be to create the minimum number of questions that you can to fully cover the specification from a variety of angles, and then learn and memorize those answers. And it's quite curious that some teachers say to us sometimes, but my students just remember the answers. Yeah, well, that's the point. The point is, this is here to help you remember the answers, okay? And if you've got 50,000 questions, then you're not going to see that question number one ever again. If you've got a smaller number of questions, and Smart Revise has about 650 for GCSE and 1,000 for A-level, that is enough for you to master the basics. And, you know, Craig will talk about mastery a little bit.
I mean, that's it. I mean, you know, 650 to 1,000 questions is still multiple questions for every single specification point. But as Dave said, you know, if you have 50,000 questions, it's no good answering a question once and getting it right. Maybe you've just learnt the content yesterday and it's your homework. If that question crops up a year and a half later in an exam. So this is really where we have the essence of the forgetting curve building in. So I've played this a couple of times. You can see the Smart Revise interface quiz mode here, and someone's answering questions. And you can see this bar. We've got this colored bar above the questions, which is kind of like you know, going up or going down. There you go, goes up to yellow. Now, this is us trying to tackle the forgetting curve. And this is an example where it's built into the heart of our product. So we have this bar above the questions called our mastery bar, and Smart Revise is constantly learning. It's understanding the questions you're getting right, it's understanding the questions you're getting wrong. It's not just giving you the same order of questions. When the mastery bar is grey, that means you've never seen that question yet. But as we said, with a small focused question set, if you use this regularly and often, you will see all the questions. If you get a question wrong, the mastery bar goes red. If you get the question right, it goes orange. This is where we go one step further. Just because you got a question right now doesn't mean you will get it right when you come to sit the exam, or doesn't mean you'd get it right if you were asked it again a month from now because you forgot. We want to keep the information fresh in your mind. It knows you got the question right. Smart Revise will ask you that question again in the future. It will ask you questions you got wrong more frequently so that you can start getting them right. But even questions you got right will come back. If you get it right twice in a row, it goes yellow. If you get it right 3 times in a row, it goes green. Now we call that mastery. We just kind of determined that. But that means you've been exposed to that question 3 times in a row, and every time you've got it right. Even then, though, you will see the question again. If you use a Smart Revise little and often from the point you start learning the course to the exam, you may see this question, I don't know, you might see a half a dozen or a dozen times. If at any point when being asked that question, you get it wrong, your bar goes all the way down to red again. Now, we had a big discussion about this. Is that fair? And then we thought, well, but it needs to be, because you could answer a question correctly 10 times in a row. If the 11th time you answer it is in the exam, and that's the time you get it wrong, then the marker will give you a 0. So that's the whole essence of Smart Revise, and how we've used quiz mode, which, as Dave said, is just the first of many modes. And I don't want this to become a big plug for Smart Revise, because we can do other videos on it. But quiz mode specifically was tackling this forgetting curve. Ask them a very specific body of knowledge focused on what they're going to be examined on, and ask them the content regular and often. Get the students to use it 5 or 10 minutes every day. Ask them wrong questions more frequently, but still ask them right questions again. And I think it's fair to say we have seen a noticeable improvement in retention of knowledge from our students.
For me, it's been quite revolutionary. I'm not getting students anymore not being able to answer the simple questions. They can answer the simple questions. And there's two other aspects of this, just to compare it to other tools that are out there that are perfectly valid, but I just want to tell you where Smart Revise is. So we don't give you sets of questions in the sense of, here are 10 questions on topic 1, here are 10 questions on topic 2. We don't do that. What we do is give you a never-ending playlist of questions. As Craig says, even if you've mastered a question, it doesn't mean it won't return at some point in the future. Just to double check that retention of knowledge, it will. So it's a never-ending playlist of questions. You can never finish or complete quiz mode. And again, that puzzles parents particularly, because they say, well, how does my child know they've finished? Well, you never finish until you get to the day of the exam. That's the point. Once you've sat the exam, then you've finished. Okay, so we don't give you, here's 10 questions, here's 10 more questions. It's a never-ending playlist, and that's done quite deliberately. And it also means that you can make it fit to your time scale. So if you only want to spend 5 minutes at the beginning of the lesson, then you can. If you want to spend 20 minutes on it while you're waiting for the bus, then you can. It doesn't impose those timings on you. And so it's extremely flexible. Even if you just did a couple of questions a day, which would take you no more than 1 minute, it will start to have some impact. The second thing, and the final thing I would say about this, is coming back to the interleaving. So the way we've got this set up is that if you belong to a class, then your teacher can control the topics. And if you're not in a class, or your teacher enables you to control the topics, then you can choose which topics you're getting questions for. And another mistake is to only allow the questions that you're currently studying at the moment. What you should do instead is, once you've taught the first topic, then unlock the first topic. Once you've taught the second topic, don't lock the first one, just unlock the second one. When you get to the third topic, don't unlock the first and the second one. Keep those open and just unlock the third. So what happens is, over time, the number of questions is slowly building up, but you're always getting asked those older questions as well. And that's where your interleaving comes from. And that's where you beat the forgetting curve.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, we've got an awful lot to say, or we could talk to you about, teaching pedagogy, the theories behind learning and retention. And Dave and I are not experts. We're constantly learning ourselves. We go on courses. We learn about ways to teach and ways to learn. But what we do want to do for this series is share some of that stuff to you, especially if some of those things we feel we have direct kind of benefit and impact. And I think understanding the forgetting curve, what the problem is, and understanding various ways you can help to overcome it and tackle it is certainly something which is beneficial to teachers and studios, and that's why we started with it. But I think we'll stop there for now. And if you've got anything other closing comments, Dave, but we'll definitely do more of these sort of videos, I think, in the future.
Just to say, if people want to find out more about Smart Revise itself and what it does, I wonder whether we've got a URL that we could share with people, or if not, I will quickly just Google Smart Revise and see if it comes up. Yep, if you just Google Smart Revise, you can then, the first link is to log into the actual system. The second link is all the discussion that we've just had. There you go. There it is on the screen. So if you want to know a little bit more about Smart Revise and what it can do for you, then go and visit that URL.
There you go. You threw me there, Dave. I wasn't ready with the banners. Truly unscripted, everybody. But yes, literally just typing in Smart Revise into Google and it appears at the top of the page anyway. Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, again. And we will catch you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.